You have to ruin the fun. Those words were uttered by Kemar Brown and secretly recorded as he beat 2-year-old Kyrell Matthews. Kyrell later suffered fatal injuries at his home in South London, and Brown was eventually charged with his murder. I'm Chris Summers, I'm a crime reporter, and this week we're looking at child abuse and child cruelty. Maria Colwell, Victoria Colombier, Peter Connolly, Arthur Labinjo Hughes, Star Hobson, and now Kyrell Matthews. All these children were killed by adults who were supposed to be looking after them, and many of them endured unimaginable cruelty and prolonged abuse. And all had, to some degree, been failed by the Child Protection Services. Kyrell Matthews died after suffering devastating injuries while living in these flats in Thornton Heath in South London in October 2019. His mother, Phylisia Shirley, had originally called 111, the non-emergency number, and said Kyrell was acting really funny and was floppy and can't breathe.
Hello, you're through the NHS 111 service, and what is it I can help you with today?
Basically, Kyrell, he's been acting really funny, like his body's floppy and his eyes is rolling back and his chest is like coming out like he can't breathe and he's not responding properly.
Okay, so is he awake at the moment?
Yeah, but it's like he'll be laying down and then he lashes out and then he's just not, he looks like he's not here basically. His eyes are just rolling back.
Based upon that information that you have just given me there, but it's advised I do arrange an emergency ambulance.
Shirley's tone is remarkably laid back in that phone call. She just doesn't sound like a parent whose child is struggling to breathe. But the 111 operator immediately realised the signs of danger. She calls an ambulance and then she starts to give Phylisia advice on how to do CPR. And sadly, by the time the paramedics arrived, Kyrell was beyond saving and he was declared dead at the hospital. Phylisia Shirley and her boyfriend were eventually charged with murdering Kyrell. We're in the City of London and we're here to meet Ed Brown, who prosecuted the Kyrell Matthews case. We're going to ask him about some of the challenges he faced in getting a conviction.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Nice to meet you.
You, come on in. Yeah, Kyrell was 2 years old when he died. He died as a result of a combination of blows and squeezing to his ribs, but also, most importantly, the most direct effect on his body that caused death was a laceration and what was called maceration of his liver in the centre of his body, just below the rib cage. And the medical evidence in our case was that that was very likely from a blow or very severe squeezing, such as to literally break open the structure of his liver and the consequent bleeding from that. Ultimately, with the violence increasing in seriousness, to the day in question, the 20th of October, when he was probably beaten so badly in the front of his chest, or below his chest, causing the injury that caused bleeding that caused death.
Later, it emerged Shirley had secretly recorded her boyfriend, Kemar Brown, on a number of occasions when he was left alone with her son. But the recordings were made because she thought he was being unfaithful to her.
She suspected her partner of seeing other women, either contacting them or other women actually coming to the address, and she would leave her phone on record. Well, naturally enough, the prosecution case was that if she was going to do such a thing, she would have listened to those recordings. And this proved to be very important in the case because, and this is the first time I've ever had this sort of evidence in my career doing these types of cases. You heard Kyrell repeatedly being hit. and he would scream, and he would scream, and he would scream, and it was very distressing. Of course, she was out of the room, out of the house, but would come back, listen to the recordings, and know that her partner had been abusing her own child.
Shirley pleaded guilty to allowing the death of a child and allowing serious physical harm to a child, but was convicted of manslaughter after a trial at the Old Bailey. Judge Mark Lucraft told Shirley she had failed in her duty as a parent and said, "You should feel utterly ashamed of what you have done." Kim R. Brown was found guilty of murder and was jailed for life with a minimum term of 25 years. It emerged in court he had a lengthy criminal record, including battery against a former girlfriend and a violent robbery of a woman. Kyrell's father, Kyrell Matthews, said, "I trusted that when he was not with me, he was in a safe place with his mother and her partner, but clearly that was not the case." It also emerged that after Kyrell died, Shirley became pregnant again and gave birth to Brown's child before she went on trial. After the trial, Croydon Safeguarding Children Partnership said Kyrell's mother did not send him to nursery or preschool, and he was not brought into his local GP for any appointments. They added there were some opportunities to identify risks to Kyrell and to be more assertive in engaging and challenging those who were entrusted with his care. We very much regret that these were not taken, and we have made changes to the way we work as a partnership to ensure that together we do everything in our power we can to protect children like Kyrell. Child protection as a specialist type of social work has developed greatly over the last 50 years. There are now protocols in place which are designed to protect children from those who are supposed to be looking after them, be they birth parents, foster parents, adoptive parents, or a parent's partner. But time after time, mistakes are made and concerns are not followed up. In December 2021, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, ordered a national review in the wake of the case of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. It emerged during a trial in Birmingham that several people had called social services with concerns about Arthur, who died at his home in nearby Solihull in June 2020. His stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for a minimum of 29 years for his murder, and Arthur's father, Thomas Hughes, was jailed for 21 years for manslaughter. Tustin had abused Arthur with a full knowledge of his father. The jury was shown video footage taken just hours before he died, which showed Arthur struggling to get up and carry a duvet. Tustin deprived him of food and water, poisoned him with salt, and ordered him to stand in the hallway for up to 14 hours a day. The jury also heard heartbreaking audio recordings Tustin had made. There have been other shocking cases recently. Savannah Brockhill was jailed for life for murdering toddler Star Hobson in Bradford, West Yorkshire. Star was the 16-month-old daughter of Savannah's girlfriend, Frankie Smith, who was jailed for just 8 years for causing or allowing her death. Brockhill, a security guard and amateur boxer, called herself the #1 psycho, and the court heard she was in a toxic relationship with Star's mother. The nature of the relationship, riddled with insecurity and possessiveness, was indicated in this video on her Snapchat account.
Guys and girls need to remember the fact that Frankie is with me. She keeps getting a lot of message requests and friends requests she's not going to accept, especially tramps like yous. And if you want to keep your kneecaps, I suggest you stop sending her them. She's with the #1 psycho.
The Attorney General described Smith's sentence as too low, and the Court of Appeal later increased it to 12 years. In 2003, 2 people were jailed for the murder of Victoria Clombier, an 8-year-old girl originally from the Ivory Coast, who endured months of torture and abuse in Tottenham, North London. In that case, Haringey Social Services admitted to a litany of mistakes and missed opportunities to rescue Victoria. 4 years later, Peter Connolly, originally known as Baby P, died at the hands of his mother's boyfriend. Again, Haringey Social Services were at fault, and this time, a social worker, 3 managers, and the Director of Children's Services were all sacked for their failings. Paula Hudgell has been campaigning for the government to set up a child cruelty register, which would prevent people convicted of child abuse of ever being put in charge of another child. Mrs. Hudgell adopted a little boy called Tony after his birth parents inflicted injuries on him, which led to both of his legs being amputated.
Our Tony came into our lives almost 7 years ago now. He had been in hospital for 3 months. He'd suffered absolutely horrific abuse by the time he was 6 weeks old, multiple fractures, and he ended up with sepsis, toxic shock and multi-organ failure, which actually left him on life support. Nobody expected him to survive, but he did. He pulled through after numerous operations, 23 operations, 8 blood transfusions. Sadly, in 2017, we had to make the devastating choice to have his legs amputated because they hadn't healed from the injuries, and it was hindering him too much. After that, I had from the CPS that charges were not going to be brought against his birth parents, which I found absolutely astonishing. I was told that there was insufficient evidence. My initial thought was they'd left him up to 10 days suffering with those injuries, and if they had taken him to hospital, his legs would have been saved.
It was due to Mrs. Hudgell's persistence that the Crown Prosecution Service eventually decided they would prosecute Tony's birth parents, Jodie Simpson and Tony Smith, who were both convicted of child cruelty and causing or allowing serious physical harm. They were jailed in 2018 for 10 years, which was the maximum sentence at the time. Mrs. Hudgell has campaigned successfully for longer sentences in such cases, and she is also pushing for a child cruelty register. The register, which would act in a similar way to the sex offenders register, would ensure that anyone convicted of any offence against a child would be on it for life and would not be able to live or work with children. A child cruelty register may prevent the deaths of many vulnerable children, but sadly, Kyrell Matthews is unlikely to be the last such death to hit the headlines.
Happy birthday.